talk to you today about soil, and I'm going to talk to you about the basics of soil, because our kind of mantra is that from the soil you get the best plants with the least amount of waste of water that you can. And we do have some issues with soil in this portion of Texas. North Texas has got a famous clay belt that makes it somewhat difficult, especially in smaller lots of residential areas that sit in this clay belt, to have water conserving landscape. So one of the first things we want to talk about is the difference between dirt and soil. So dirt is what your dog or your shoes track into the house. Soil itself provides many different purposes. It anchors the plants. It holds water and nutrients for the plants. It's a home to multiple organisms and small microscopic animals and non-microscopic animals. It filters rainwater. It regulates the discharge of excess rainwater to prevent flooding. Proper soil will move rainwater deeper into the soil. It's capable of storing large amounts of organic matter. So that's the difference between just picking up a wad of dirt out in the middle of a cracked pasture or picking up a fistful of loamy soil that you've created in your own home garden environment. So let's look at the mineral texture of soil. Soil comes as clay, and it's defined by the size of its smallest particles, and those are 0.002 of a millimeter. Clay is got a flat shape, and in this part of North Texas, the clay, when it's wet, is like a slick clay you can make a pot out of, and when it's dry, it has cracks 3 to 6 inches when it's extremely dry. So it's not a great soil. It has to be worked on to make it a soil that will hold water and provide the right growing conditions for plants. Silt has a little bit larger shape to the basic component of it. You can think of silt as around the edges of rivers, and silt is what comes down from mountains, gets torn down by rain and carried out into the ground areas. While silt is desirable, it's not by itself a really great soil. The third is sand. Sand has the largest particles of all, and while it has many advantages to it, in that you can have water move through it quickly, and that does have some storage capacity as the water moves down through it. It actually moves water better than clay or silt, but it's sort of lacking in materials that plants need to grow. The best soil is a combination of all three of these: sand, silt, and clay. And that kind of soil is naturally created on, for example, the Great Plains, where we have the great growing area for our major crops. And it's a balance of sand, silt, and clay. You can look at your own soil and see what you have. Although if you're living here in North Texas, you're going to most likely have a greater amount of clay than you are, for certain, sand. And you may be lucky to have some silt in it. So to create a really good soil, you need to know what your soil is like that you're dealing with. And this little diagram right here shows you how you can do that. You can just get a plain glass jar, add your materials that from your yard, and we're not talking about going out and scraping off the top inch. We're talking about going down 6 to 10 inches, getting a good sample down that deep, putting it in this jar, and really shaking it up a lot, and letting it slowly settle out over several hours. It will settle out into different layers, and you can identify where your particular residential dirt falls. It's either going to be a good combination of sand, clay, and silt, in which case you will have loam, which we were looking for, or it's going to be on the clay side or on the sand side, which means it's going to need some help. So we look at the layers that the soil is. There's basically 6 layers, but the layer that we are the most concerned about as gardeners is the top 10 inches, which is called the topsoil. There's a saying that says that without the top 10 to 12 inches of soil across the entire earth, there would be no life as we know it. That's how important the topsoil is. So when we're looking at where vegetables grow and where most plants grow, and even where a lot of trees grow, it's in that topsoil area and a little bit into the subsoil area. When you're talking about improving the soil on your property, you're really talking about improving the top 10 inches. Going down much deeper than that is not going to make that significant a difference. So what soil layers can we improve that topsoil layer? Oops, sorry. All the other layers are influenced by the location of the dirt, the soil. Areas closer to the Gulf Coast are going to have a predominance of sand. Areas closer to the major rivers like the Mississippi will have a predominance of silt. And like I said, we have the lucky clay belt in North Texas. For those who are new to this area, the clay belt can present some serious issues not only to gardeners, but to stability of house foundations, etc. So, in addition to having sand, silt, clay, there are various minerals that are in all soil, and particularly nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We call that NPK. All soil has NPK to different levels. All soil has water. All soil has oxygen or air. And most desirable soil has organic matter, which we call humus, which is actually decayed plants and animals. Organic matter is also the roots from plants. And organic matter also includes microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, and microscopic animals. So I'm kind of going to go through this macronutrients part pretty quickly. The 3 major things that you need to have in your soil, your good soil, is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Your plants are going to get carbon dioxide from the air, so that's where they're going to get their carbon. They're going to get hydrogen from water and water vapor. They're going to get oxygen from the air. What we have to provide them is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so there are smaller amounts of minerals that are required for good plant growth: calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and even more. iron, copper, boron, chlorine in the form of a chloride, cobalt, and silicon. So why does soil have to have all these things? Well, because the plant is going to use them all, every single one of them, to build sugars, plant cellulose, plant roots. All those materials go into helping plants to thrive in what would otherwise be just dirt. So we need to know what kind of minerals and things we have. We also need to know what kind of pH our soil has. Most people are familiar with the term acid or alkaline. And anything that's acid, you'll see on the chart down on the lower right, is going to be in the pH number of 7 or less. Anything that is alkaline will be above 7 or more, higher. In our area, the most acidic soil is probably in East Texas, where the pines grow and the azaleas grow. In our area of Texas, the basic soil kind of begins around where the limestone is. The limestone is underneath the top 30 inches of soil, and that's around in the Austin area. So they have more basic soil there. That influences not whether a plant grows or not, but what types of plants grow in those soils. So we're looking at several things. The major chemicals that soil needs, which is NPK, the minor minerals that they need for stem strength and etc., and whether or not they are acid or basic. So why do you care about all these stuff? Because you want to grow plants, and you want to grow plants because they help to hold the soil in place. And the plants, because they help to hold the soil in place, and because they make long root systems throughout the soil, help to hold more moisture within our soil. You're not going to grow things on concrete. You're going to grow things on soil that can hold water and can hold oxygen in it, because even the roots of our plants require oxygen. So how do we get this soil? You're gardening within the top 6 to 10 inches, so that's what you want to worry about. You want to know what your soil is like today, and so the first thing is you get a soil test. Why a soil test? Because it's going to tell you all those things. It's going to tell you what you need. Do you need more phosphorus? Do you need more potassium? Do you need more nitrogen? Are you lacking iron? You find out these things by taking soil samples and doing soil tests. Now, you can do soil tests and buy soil testing kits on the internet. Or if you see down here at the bottom, there's a blue link to soil testing site at Texas A&M University. And they do routine analysis for $12 for a sample. And what you'll find in your yard is, unless you have a really tiny yard with just a very, very small backyard, like a 0 lot line backyard or something, is that you want to take more than one soil sample. For our own property here, we have a clay patch. that I could probably go out, or could have at some point, and just made a pot out of. It was so much clay. But in other parts of our yard, it was more loam. So you want to figure out where can you improve your soil, and first, what is its condition right now that I what I need to get more of, and what I need to make this soil better so the plants will grow in it, put a lot of roots in it, and hold water. So we have different amendments that change our soil into loam. So our goal is we all want loam. It would be really great if you could buy a brand new house and it had all loam on it. Very, very few do. So how do you get loam? You add soil amendments. And there's a couple of ones that I want to talk about here, because Texas AgriLife is based on the science of agriculture and horticulture. We recognize both organic means and chemical means of improving soil. So, for example, if your soil is lacking in nitrogen, you would want to add compost or manures. If you need other elements added, like iron or sulfur or calcium, you can get those through both organic and inorganic commercially sold fertilizers. And the organic ones are usually something like worm droppings, fish oil. The commercial fertilizers are actually created in chemical factories. Either one will bring your soil up to the NPK and other mineral standards that are required for your plants to have really good growth. But the one that we're going to talk about right now is the one that is preferred by master gardeners, and that is composting. Composting is taking organic material or plant matter. This is leaves, twigs, small twigs, plants that are spent, like perennials that have spent for the winter and their leaves and stems are done growing, and annual plants that you're not going to keep in the ground because they're annuals, and you actually put them in a pile and you wait for them to decompose. And when they are fully decomposed, they're going to be dark, slightly moist, crumbly in your hand. You can make a little ball out of them, but you can also just sort of crumble them and they fall as crumbles to the ground. The compost process is a natural process that happens in forests. You've got a layer of leaves always on the base of the forest, and it's always in a process of different kinds of decay. For that decay to take place, you have insects and earthworms in particular, microorganisms like bacteria and fungi that help in breaking down those larger leaves and larger stems, twigs, plant material, etc., into small pieces that are better used by the plant. Composting is an interesting thing to me because you can spend $100, $200, $300 on a special kind of compost bin. You can get plans for building compost bins out of wood pallets material online. You can find the plans for how to build a bin to compost in. You can just pile things, and if you've got a big enough yard, you can go and find a place where you can inconspicuously pile the materials and let them sort of self-compost. The reason why we like compost is it is this natural process. If you're going to make a bin and compost materials for yourself, you can include things like non-oily, non-protein food residues. This would not be, for example, your leftover cheese and potato casserole, because the cheese is protein and oily. Somebody might ask, why do you not want oils or protein in a composting pile? And that's because it's going to attract the wrong kind of insects, which would be insects like ants and things like that, that sort of move away the more valuable insects that help in actually decomposing your compost. You have to maintain a proper temperature in wherever you choose to have your pile of compost, because as the material begins decomposing, it sets off heat as an energy. And that energy is concentrated more towards the middle of the compost pile. So to spread the uncomposted material around so it gets its turn near the hot middle, you have to turn the pile periodically with a pitchfork or some other shovel or something like that. And to aid, especially in this part of Texas, which tends to be drier and hotter, to aid this composting, decomposing process, you have to have water. So you've got to add it, because unless it's going to rain just the right amount every week, you've got to maintain moisture in the composting pile. And then once it is dark and small particles and doesn't smell funny, it smells kind of earthy, which is good. It doesn't smell like leftovers. It doesn't smell like slimy lettuce or anything like that. Then you're ready to harvest it. So when it's done, how do you know that for certain? You can wait until it cools off and actually measure its temperature. If you measure its temperature and it's within 10 degrees of the air temperature, it's pretty well decomposed and can then be used on top of your gardening plots, which is where you want your plants to grow and where you want your water to stay. So also, as this material is decomposing, it's decreasing. And when it decreases to about a third of its original volume, you can pretty well assume that the decomposing is done. And then you can use it and put it on top of your planting areas, and it will give food and minerals to the plants and keep them healthy. A healthy plant is going to be less affected by our crazy Texas weather, which goes from -10 to 115. And so if you've got a really healthy plant, it's going to be able to withstand that kind of change. And this compost is going to help that plant maintain water. Now, what do you do with it? You take the compost when it's ready. One thing I forgot to mention on that last slide too is you can put it down when it's not quite ready, and it will still decompose. It will just take it a much longer period of time. But in the process of decomposing, it may steal nitrogen from the soil to help the decomposition process. And what you want to be doing with compost is actually adding the decomposed nitrogen back to the plant. So it really pays off for the plant if it's truly decomposed and composted. So you take it and you spread 3 inches of organic compost on top of your topsoil. You can work this in to the top 6 to 8 inches of the topsoil. Distribute it throughout that growing area. In a brand new bed, it's real easy to do. You go and get a tiller or rent a tiller, or you have a good pitchfork and you just keep turning the soil over until the compost, the 3 inches that you've put on it, has been worked into the lower levels of the soil. And that's going to give support for a regular planting garden. When you are doing this, when you're adding the compost to already established gardens, it's a little trickier. You would, in cases like that, I think, unless you had a real serious clay problem, you would put the top 3 inches of organic compost down, not around the stem of the plant, or the trunk of the tree, for example, but you would put it all around the outside of the plants and let worms and other microorganisms move that organic compost deeper into the soil. That's if you're dealing with a more established garden. For vegetable gardens, it takes 6 inches of compost worked into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil to get that soil ready for either seedlings that you've been growing or small plants that you buy at the store, or larger plants that you might buy at the store as well. Now, the next thing is you're going to, on top of the 3 inches of organic compost, you're going to add 3 inches of mulch, which is going to reduce the temperature of the soil down on the plant level. It's going to limit the amount of weeds that grow and compete with the good plants that you like. And it also is going to conserve water by preventing evaporation. Water evaporates very quickly from cement. It evaporates quickly from untreated clay. It evaporates much, much slower from soil that has a loamy texture to it. Now, what's going to happen to this organic compost and the organic mulch that you've put on top of your soil? It's going to continue to decompose. It's going to continue over time to go down into the soil, to be carried down by the earthworm, etc. The plant roots are going to grow into that soil, and they're going to loosen and make places for the even further decomposed compost and mulch to move down into the soil. It's going to better it over time. It's also going to disappear. So it's going to make the plant grow taller and better. So this is not something that you do and then wait 20 years and sell your house with the 9 inches of compost and mulch combination that you've put on there. This is something you get to do a lot. So let's talk about what the mulch itself is. It's a top dressing. You put it on the garden beds primarily to lessen water evaporation, to stop weeds from taking up water and competing with the plants that you like. It will decompose into the soil below it unless you buy, and you can do it, plastic mulch. Not recommended by master gardeners. It's plastic mulch takes care of lessening evaporation, but it doesn't allow oxygen into the soil. And you really want oxygen throughout that top 10 to 12 inches of soil to have healthy plants. So when do you apply mulch? Well, in the early spring, after you've trimmed your perennial plants. It's real easy then because you can apply it all over around, much easier than trying to apply it around, for example, bushes that you've grown, and you actually have to get down in between the bushes and place the mulch and place the organic compost material. You should do this in the spring or in the fall, or anytime your mulch is less than, say, 3 inches thick. If you recall our Texas weather, I'm thinking back over this past year. In the fall, it wasn't too bad. We got some rain. Then we had a little bit of freezing. And then we got some rain again. And now we're kind of into the windy, not so rainy time. So this is a good time to get a good solid mulch cover on top of your compost and let it decompose throughout the rest of the spring and the summer, and then check it in the fall. If it's less than 2 inches thick, you might want to add some more mulch or add some more compost so that your plants can make it through the winter when it gets really, really freezing cold here. Okay, again, like I say, we at the Master Gardeners Association prefer that mulch be organic. Now I'm going to kind of skip to and how you can improve your soil by building new beds. This kind of gets into something that Master Gardeners are, as a whole, interested in. Less grass and more planting areas. Planting areas can be watered 2-3 times a week. You can get the organic materials on it. You can get the compost. You can get the mulch on it. You can preserve water on the garden beds more than on lawns. And for that reason, we encourage people to move as much of the lawn as you're comfortable with, because we realize that gardening takes time, energy, and effort on the part of the owners. Anyway, if you decide that this is the way you want to go, is to get more beds, more garden beds in your area, we've got a couple of things about raised beds. Here, this just gives you some idea about advantages, and where when you're building a raised bed, you want to provide some irrigation for it. It's your opportunity, if you're building new ones, to provide some either very low sprinkler heads or even the under the ground sprinkling system. So there's several ways to do this change. Basically, I've chosen to highlight 4 things called the lasagna garden, the keyhole garden, sheet mulching, and something called hugelkultur. And there's a really intriguing, if you can find it, documentary called The Biggest Little Farm, which shows how this family basically took wasteland and turned it into a very productive farm through using these various ideas for improving the soil and making pasture land better, etc. It's an 1.5-hour documentary, fascinating. Okay, here's the examples of raised beds. They come in all kinds of sizes and shapes. You can spend as much or as little money as you want to on them. What you're basically doing is putting lumber or metal. There's some really attractive metal ones I'll show you in a minute, above the ground level, and starting with your organic compost or mulch, a little bit of the bottom soil mixed in, and giving you really, really good soil for a garden. These are metal, and they are out at the Clear Creek Natural Heritage Center in Denton. And they are being used by both master naturalists and master gardeners for trials on growing plants, which ones are going to grow the best. That's 10 to 12 inches soil max, and they will be able to grow lots of things in there. That's very, very loamy soil. And that's an area where you can go and just visit. It doesn't cost anything, and see how they're doing with this project. There's this new kind of method of gardening. It's called the lasagna garden. There's YouTubes about it, lots and lots of videos. You can do this with a raised bed, or you don't have to do it with a raised bed. You can just do it on a lawn or an unplanted part of your yard. Layer 1 is cardboard soaked in water. Layer 2 is a green layer of vegetable scraps, lawn, garden clippings, manure, peat moss, etc. Layer 3 is a brown layer of shredded leaves, hay, newspaper, material like that. And layer 4 is more green. Layer 5 is more brown. And the final layer would be compost. And once you establish this and realize that this is a lot of stuff, so you're not going to make a 50 by 50 foot garden out of this, but you could make a 4 foot by 4 foot garden pretty easily, because it's going to be about 2 feet deep, and you can plant in it pretty much immediately. Second one is the thing called a keyhole garden, which again is a type of raised garden. This one happens to be made of these bricks or stones, and they are creating in the very center is a leaky container. You purposely want it to be leaky, where you're going to always be putting compostable materials. They're going to be in a constant state of decomposition, and you just keep adding to them and watering it and adding to it and watering it. And your earthworms and your microorganisms are going to get materials from that and carry it out into the circular garden. And you have this little pathway to the center of this keyhole garden where you can place the compost, the materials that you are using to make compost out of continuously. The next way is this thing called sheet mulching. So if you're going to build yourself a bed over your grass, you go out and get at any of many, there's many different places where you find recycled cardboard. You go to the place, you get the cardboard, you split it until it's in flat sheets, you take off the tape. It's always helpful if it doesn't have a lot of labeling on it that might have plastics in it. And you just set it up as where you want the garden to be, and you wet it. You make sure that this is really, really wet. You can dig a little area, dig out the yard, the grassy area, and plant a bush or plant a rose plant or bush or something directly into where the grassy area is that's now surrounded by cardboard. And use something heavy, either a rock or some of those upside down stakes that they have, wire stakes, to hold the cardboard in place. And then start putting down your dirt, your compost, and your mulch. And you've created a new garden for your yard without having to till and kill grass, etc. The last one I'm going to mention is this was developed in Africa, where trees that were felled were placed on top of each other, and on top of that was a layer of dirt, and on top of that were seeds for small grasses and plants and small trees. Because it's so dry there, what's happened is that this becomes kind of like an area that holds water within the logs. And the process is called hugelkultur, and it has been successfully used in some areas where there's really a lot of drought. So again, you're changing the nature of your soil, and by changing the adding the wood, which will continue decomposing over hopefully a long time. You can also use it to make a berm area, which blocks or stops water from leaving your property and going into the city drains, etc. And it helps to keep the water on your property where your plants can use it and need it. Okay, here's an article that I ran across several years back that I thought was really cool. This woman was paying $1,200 a month in water in California, in Pasadena. So she took a class, and she wanted to increase her water conservation, increase privacy, and create a more natural view for her to look out on. So she used sheet mulching, lasagna garden, and hugelkultur to create plantable areas. She got some of her expenses reimbursed by her city because the idea was to reduce water use, and she was successful in doing that. So here is kind of the result of her area. She's growing grapes and cherry tomatoes. This is her front yard, which actually has kind of a shield from the street, so she can grow these vegetables and not be offensive to some of her neighbors who might think that they're not that attractive. She actually has her entire front yard in plantings and vegetables and bushes, etc., and has successfully reduced her water bill extremely over what it had been. So keep in mind that all of this success with plantings is based on having really good loamy soil. And getting the access to that may require some creative work on your part if this is a problem for you. I know in Denton County, we have a master gardener whose house is like this. Her front yard and her backyard and her side yard are all plantings. And she did it over a fairly good period of time. And she did it using our city's materials called Dino Dirt, which is a recycled product, the city of Denton